Professor Eyal Zisser is the Vice Rector of Tel-Aviv University and an expert on contemporary history of the Middle East and Eastern Africa. He has written a few successful books on various Middle Eastern subjects, the latest being Syria, Protest, Revolution, Civil War, that was published in 2014. Good evening, Professor Zisser.
Good evening.
Well, I understand that the deal is a response to the U.S. sanctions. What are the current sanctions against Syria?
Well, first of all, the deal is part of an ongoing relations between Iran and Syria, and after all, the Iranian intervention in the civil war was aimed at enabling Iran to spread its influence to Syria, Lebanon, also Iraq. So they didn't need the United States as an excuse to try and establish their presence there. This is a strategical goal for the Iranian. But nevertheless, of course, Syria is suffering severe economic crisis nowadays. There was the war, and then it was over, at least the fight in the battlefield, and then the coronavirus, and then the American sanctions. And it's a real problem. For the first time after several years, we heard about demonstration and unrest in Syria, demonstrations against the regime, something that Bashar al-Assad was not used to for the last several years, since he gained a military victory in the battlefield. So clearly every average Syrian on the street feel the American sanction, inflation, lack of jobs, shortage of supply, food, oil, you name it.
Mm-hmm. Are the Iranians in any position to offer economic aid to any foreign countries, or specifically to Syria?
Clearly not. Yes, Syria is a poor country and few millions will help them, but the Iranians cannot support and help Lebanon and Hezbollah as well, and Hezbollah is more important than Syria. So clearly it's not about ensuring, providing Bashar al-Assad with financial support. It's about the day that will follow the war. Mm-hmm. One day, the Iranian hope, the Syrians hope, peace will come and security will be ensured in Syria. And in that day, the Iranians want to make sure that they will be one of those who will benefit from their presence in Syria. So it's more to the future, is more about security issues and the supply of weapons. It's not about reviving the Syrian economy.
Mm-hmm. So in that way, it's more symbolic. They're not really going to help the Syrian economy at this point.
No, what they mainly want is to help the Iranian economy, to ensure that Iranian economies will be involved in the rebuilding of the Syrian infrastructure, that some ports, airfields will be given to the Iranians like they were given to the Russians. So it's more about Iranian interest rather than to help the Syrians.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very interesting point that I wanted to clarify. From an economic point of view, what is the economic potential of Syria? I mean, we live next to Syria all our lives, but it always looks like a poor country that doesn't have any potential. Is that true?
Yes, President Trump put it rightly when he says Syria, it's sand and death. Okay, so wow. Some oil, yeah, but Iran doesn't need oil, and the oil is not enough. Agriculture production, okay. The strategical importance of Syria is for transit. I mean, goods from Europe that will be delivered through Turkey, Syria, and then will get to Iraq and the Gulf states. This was the historical role Syria played, but as state for itself has no any economic importance.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps when, I mean, after World War I, when there was these mandates for the French and for the British, did they do a mistake carving the borders of Syria the way they did?
No, not necessarily. First of all, they thought about the minority, and at that time there were Christians in Syria. After the civil war, they disappeared, and then they thought of Syria as, you know, the ports, as you produce oil in Saudi Arabia or in Iraq, and you want to bring this oil to Europe so it can be moved through the Syrian land. So this is what made Syria important. And of course, like we remember from the Second World War, it's a strategic position. And as Churchill put it, if you hold the Middle East, you will win the war.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of Assad deciding on which side to be, does he have an alternative? So let's say, can he turn towards the West like other Arab countries did and forget about Iran or Russia or whatever? Is it a possibility?
Why should he do it? First of all, I don't see anyone in the West waiting for him or offering him anything. Mm-hmm. But even if it happens, Assad will always remember that in the moment of truth, the Iranians were those who came to help him, not the West. So he knows, the war is maybe over, but there is still unrest and fighting might be resumed, and he still needs the Iranian. I mean, the Americans or the European will never come to help him, to fight for him. And that's what the Russians and the Iranian did, and he will never forget it.
Mm-hmm. And well, you mentioned peace will come. I assume you meant the internal peace in Syria. Yeah. But does it mean that that Syria is preparing, or perhaps in the day after, preparing for an escalation against Israel?
No, I think that that's the last thing they have in mind. Even before the war, they were very careful, very cautious, not to make any move that can lead to an escalation. That's the last thing they need. And especially now, after the war, when Syria is in ruins, and what they need is to rebuild Syria and not to get involved in a new war, bloody war.
Mm-hmm. And what can Israel do in order to stabilize the situation? I mean, try to help Syria be as calm and as less aggressive against Israel as possible, because that's mainly what we want. We just want it to be restful.
Well, first of all, to maintain this balance of power that gives Israel the leverage, but apart from it, of course, to prevent Iran from establishing military presence on Syrian soil. That's the important thing, because Iranian presence means escalation, means continuation of the tension, and that's the target number one of Israel, to prevent the Iranians from establishing their presence in Syria. And with Bashar, we'll manage somehow, like we managed with him and with his father before the eruption of the civil war in that country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Professor Eyal Zisser, Vice Rector of the Tel-Aviv University, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.